train to Mundo Fine, night train to the end, running hard and running fast to meet my future and away from my past, taking the gamble that cannot last, night train to the end. Hell's ride to Mundo Fine, hell's ride to the end. Sold my soul to the devil's pen, he draws me hard with a merciless hand, and all I bought is a handful of sand, night train to the end.
Welcome to Frater SH Night Show. I am your host Sir Peter Pendragon, and this is the show about all things weird and strange. Frater SH is presently finished a reformatted version of Misty Forest Bible Ministries. It incorporates a half-hour lesson from St. Thomas Aquinas' Summer Theology, which is the oldest in-depth book on Christian theology. The second part is a reconstruction or reenactment of a 15th century Catholic Mass. This is a pristine Mass before all the modernist changes made the Catholic Church a complete mess. Frater describes his church as a pre-Reformation church. It uses the Septuagint for the Old Testament or Vulgate Old Testament, which is similar. The New Testament is Greek, but the RERUN's Bible is the closest to translating it closely. The RERUN's is one of the few English Bibles to have stayed close to the original Greek texts. The modern Bibles utilize the Masoretic Hebrew for the Old Testament, and there are errors in the actual Hebrew. The Masoretic Hebrew is not there. Same Hebrew Moses or David used. They used Palo Hebrew. That looks like rune designs. First a word about Sederingrad Productions, and then we will have paranormal news.
Welcome to Sederingrad Productions. We specialize in spiritual books, comic books and old public domain books that have long been forgotten. We also have done artwork for war, history books and fiction-based works. We recommend our Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 that is quite popular and attempts to bring the Book of Enoch back into the Bible's list of books. The Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 also has a few selections from Josephus, a Jewish historian. And also the book has Jubilees and the Apocrypha, which is also available in Catholic Bibles. Frater SH is an esoteric researcher who is out to reveal ancient knowledge, both known and forbidden. Frater SH has appeared on Joshua P. Warren's Speaking of Strange, Kevin Smith's show, UFO Show, and Ghost Chronicles International with Ron Clerk and Richard Felix, the historian from Most Haunted on the Travel Channel. You can find Frater's Conspiracy Spirituality store at http://www.lulu.com/spotlight/Frater.
Welcome back, and now paranormal news. UFO light mesmerizes Pennsylvania witness. Picture photo of witness arm with punctures discovered the morning after the UFO incident. Credit, MUFON. By Roger Marsh. A Pennsylvania witness at Camp Hill reported watching a circle-shaped light the size of a house hovering at the tree line that appeared to mesmerize both the witness and a dog, and may be related to bite marks that turned up on the witness's arm, according to testimony in Case 80-2029 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness's dog woke the witness at 2:17 a.m. on January 7, 2017, and was immediately taken outside to the backyard. She immediately ran around the pool 4 times, without ever stopping to go to the bathroom, and then stopped in the middle of my yard, facing the field behind my backyard, the witness stated. All of a sudden, A bright light appeared at the end of this field. The witness described the light. It was perfectly round and was about the size of a house. The light was hovering slightly above the trees. There was no origination point, either above, below, left or right, to this light. The light tiled downward and, at that point, there. Light appeared to be oval-shaped. The edges of the light were defined, with no shadows or extending light from it. There were no noises or sounds. As a matter of fact, everything was unusually still and very dark that evening. The witness became frozen and mesmerized by the light source. My dog was also frozen. She did not move. The light lasted approximately 7 seconds and then disappeared quickly. As soon as the light disappeared, my dog ran to the front of the fence facing the front yard, street, and began growling. She growled 4 separate times and then stopped. I immediately called for her, and we went into the house. When I came inside, I checked the clock. It was 2:24 a.m. I looked out the front window to see if I could see anything or to justify why she was growling. I did not see anything, but I did not go outside in the front yard. Honestly, I was scared at that point. But when the witness woke the next morning reporting a sore left forearm, I brought my dog downstairs and then looked at my arm. It was bleeding, swollen and red. The area that was swollen was about the size of a golf ball. Within this swollen area were 4 bite marks. The 4 red bite marks were positioned to look like a smile. Above this smile is 1 additional bite mark which is located above and in the center of the 4 marks. The swelling is down and the redness is gone. However, as of February 12, 2017, there is still 1 red bite mark on my arm. The spot still itches and is slightly raised. It feels like something is under this spot. When I awoke from sleeping, I realized I had fallen into a deep sleep. While it appeared as though I slept for a very short time, I felt as though I was completely rested. 1. Final thought. Everything during this event occurred in Falls, Pennsylvania. MUFON field investigator Jason Akers investigated this case and closed it as an unknown. After listening to the witness, I believe she saw something that night, Akers wrote in his report. My investigation and the FOIA report showed that there were no police, emergency, military, or civilian crafts in the air at the time of the incident. There were no weather anomalies that took place at the time that could have accounted for what she had seen. It is my belief that their witness had seen a UFO. Camp Hill is a borough in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, population 7,888. This case was reported to MUFON February 12, 2017, and is one of MUFON's cases of interest for 2017. Disc UFO hovers 50 feet over Indiana tree line. By Roger Marsh. An Indiana witness at Couts reported watching a silent, disc-shaped object just 50 feet above the tree line, according to testimony in case 81407. The witness was outside walking a dog at 5:10 a.m. on January 8, 2017, when the incident occurred. It was around 5 in the morning with a clear, dark sky, the witness stated. When I was on my way to my house, I noticed a very bright light moving above the trees in the forest. It was around 50 feet above the trees, moving from north to south. The witness described the object. It was a circular object around 10 feet in diameter. As it moved over the trees, it did not light up the woods underneath the light. As it approached the road, the object and light just disappeared. It made no sound. Indiana MUFON State Director Philip Leach investigated this case and closed it as an unknown. The object hovered in place for around 1 minute and then began to come out of the wood line heading towards a cornfield, Leach stated in his report. Witness describes the object reacting as if it had seen him, with the result being there. Bright, white light just shut off. The witness advised that the event did not cause his canine to react in any way. No time loss, due to the witness being on somewhat of a timeline to walk the dog before work. The witness did describe the morning as being eerie, which somewhat concerned him during and before the walk. Of special note, the witness did describe the white light as not shining on their trees or landscape, just illuminating the object itself. Katz is a town in Pleasant Township, Porter County, Indiana. The population was 1,879 at the 2010 census. Green Disc UFO report under 100 feet over New Mexico. By Roger Marsh. A New Mexico witness at Pojoke reported watching a bright green, disc-shaped object less than 100 feet off the ground, according to testimony in case 81321 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness was driving with her husband from Taos County to Santa Fe at 6:20 p.m. on January 3, 2017, when the incident began. I saw a bright, strobing object heading south on the west side of the highway just as we were coming up to the exit for Los Alamos, the witness stated. Near Pojoke in the stores and gas stations and casino that are at that point on the road. The witness was headed northbound. It was less than 100 feet elevation. Very bright green. It seemed to be a spiraling or spinning pattern to it and round, but flat. I think it seemed to spiral on the bottom of it, but it may have been more spherical. There were no other lights on it, and in my mind, I tried to say it was a helicopter because of the spinning, but it was bright green. And no other lights on it. The object appeared to move twice as fast as the vehicle, moving along at 50 miles per hour, moving at about 100 miles per hour. I tried to point and tell my husband fast enough so he could see it, but he was only able to see it in the back window of the SUV, maybe a mile or more behind us over an overpass. He was able to see the strobing green light, but not the spiral or spinning pattern. I had music on and the windows closed, so I have no idea if it had a noise associated with it. I was very aware that it was not explainable in my mind. I had no frame of reference for what I had seen, nor did my husband, who could not explain something moving at that speed, so low and bright lime green. I was constantly looking for others or something to explain it. We lost sight of it because I was headed north. And while I did have the desire to turn around and chase it, I knew I was not fast enough to pull a U-turn across 6 lanes. New Mexico MUFON State Section Director David Hillendahl investigated this case and closed it as an unknown. Witness provided no further information, Hillendahl stated in his report. I did drive the exact same route to determine if the sighting might have been the result of sign reflection or other natural phenomena. Washington witness describes 2 low-flying triangles. By Roger Marsh. A Washington witness at Bonnie Lake reported watching 2 triangle-shaped objects low-flying with white and red lights, according to testimony in case 81301 from the Mutual UFO Network. MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. If you look on a map, my brother and I were headed east on Rhodes Lake Road coming from my brother's house on the corner of Angeline Road and Rhodes Lake Road. When we pulled onto the road, We immediately noticed 3 white lights shaped like a giant triangle UFO over downtown Bonnie Lake to our north. The object was very low on the horizon and the witness could only see it through trees. Then we got to the corner of Rhodes Lake Road and 198th Avenue when we noticed another craft almost directly above us. The second object was much closer and the witness could make out its shape. It was illuminated by white and red lights and was triangular with rounded corners, but 3D. Obviously. It was slowly spinning. I noticed it wasn't moving and then it immediately started moving west about as fast as you see a plane move, but this was much closer than a plane, so it must have been going much slower than that. Then it stopped again for a second and started going southwest at a considerable speed. That's when I lost it in the tree line and nothing else after. Washington field investigators Calvin Owens and Mary Owens investigated this case and closed it as an unknown UAV. Now for a new feature on Frater SH's Night Show. I will read a classic science fiction story from a classic pulp magazine. Off on a Comet, or Hector Servadac, by Jules Verne. Bookle. Chapter 1. A challenge. Nothing, sir, can induce me to surrender my claim. I am sorry, Count, but in such a matter, your views cannot modify mine. But allow me to point out that my seniority unquestionably gives me a prior right. Mere seniority, I assert, in an affair of this kind, cannot possibly entitle you to any prior claim whatever. Then, Captain, no alternative is left but for me to compel you to yield at the sword's point. As you please, Count, but neither sword nor pistol can force me to forego my pretensions. Here is my card. And mine. This rapid altercation was thus brought to an end by the formal interchange of the names of their disputants. On one of the cards was inscribed, Captain, Hector Servadac. Staff Officer, Mostaganum. On the other was the title, Count Wassily Timashkv. On board the schooner Dobrina. It did not take long to arrange that seconds should be appointed, who would meet in Mostaga at 2 o'clock that day, and the captain and the count were on the point of parting from each other, with a salute of punctilious courtesy, when Timashkv, as if struck by a sudden thought, said abruptly, perhaps it would be better, Captain, not to allow the real cause of this to transpire. Far better, replied Servadac, it is undesirable in every way for any names to be mentioned. In that case, however, continued the Count, it will be necessary to assign an ostensible pretext of some kind. Shall we allege a musical dispute? A contention in which I feel bound to defend Wag. Ner, while you are the 2Ls champion of Roz. Silly. I am quite content, answered Servadac, with a smile, and with another low bow they parted. The scene as here depicted, took place upon their extremity of a little cape on the Algerian coast, between Mostaganem and Tinia, about 2 miles from the mouth of the Shelif. The headland rose more than 60 feet above the sea level, and there, azure waters of the Mediterranean, as they softly kissed the strand, were tinged with the reddish hue of the ferriferous rocks that formed its space. It was the 31st of December. The noontide sun, which usually illuminated the various projections of their coast with a dazzling brightness, was hidden by a dense mass of cloud, and the fog, which for some unaccountable cause, had hung for the last 2 months over nearly every region in the world, causing serious interruption to traffic between continent and continent, spread its dreary veil across land and sea. After taking leave of the staff officer, Count Wassily Timashkov wended his way down to a small creek, and took his seat in the stern of a light. For all that had been awaiting his return, this was immediately pushed off from shore, and was soon alongside a pleasure yacht, that was lying to not many cable lengths away. At a sign from Servadac, an orderly, who had been standing at a respectful distance, led forward a magnificent Arabian horse. The captain vaulted into the saddle, and followed by his attendant, well mounted as himself, started off towards Mostag. The Nem. It was 12:30 when the two riders crossed the bridge that had been recently erected over the Shilif, and a quarter of an hour later there. Amazing stories. Steeds, flecked with foam, dashed through the mass. Kara Gate, which was one of 5 entrances, opened in the embattled wall that encircled the town. At that date, Mostaganem contained about 15,000 inhabitants, 3,000 of whom were French. Besides being one of the principal district towns of the province of Oran, it was also a military station. Mostaganem rejoiced in a well-sheltered harbor, which enabled it to utilize all the rich products of the Mina and the lower Shelif. It was the existence of so good a harbor amidst the exposed cliffs of this coast that had induced their owner of the Dobrigna to winter in these parts, and for 2 months the Russian standard had been seen floating from her yard, whilst on her masthead was hoisted the pennant of the French Yacht Club, with the distinctive letters H, C, W, T, the initials of Count Timashkov. Having entered the town, Captain Servadac made his way towards Matmore, the military quarter, and was not long in finding 2 friends on whom he might rely, a major of the 2nd Fusiliers, and a captain of the SDH artillery. The 2 officers listened gravely enough to Servadac's request that they would act as his seconds in an affair of honor, but could not resist a smile on hearing that the dispute between him and the Cat had originated in a musical discussion. Surely, they suggested, the matter might be easily arranged, a few slight concessions on either side, and all might be amicably adjusted. But no representations on their part were of any avail. Hector Servadac was inflexible. No concession is possible, he replied, resolutely. Rossini has been deeply injured, and I cannot sue for the injury to be unavenged. Wagner a fool. I shall keep my word. I am quite firm. It so, then, replied one of the officers, and after all, you know, a sword cut need not be a very. Certainly not, rejoined Servadac, and especially in my case, when I have not the slightest intention of being wounded at all. Incredulous as they naturally were as to their assigned cause of the quarrel, Servadac's friends had no alternative but to accept his explanation. And without further parley they started for the staff office, where, at 2 o'clock precisely, they were to meet the seconds of Count Timashkov. 2 hours later they had returned. All the preliminaries had been arranged. The Count, who like many Russians abroad was an aide-de-camp of the Tsar, had of course proposed swords as the most appropriate weapons, and the duel was to take place on the following morning, the 1st of January, at 9 o'clock, upon the cliff at a spot about a mile and a half from the mouth of the Shelif, with the assurance that they would not fail to keep their appointment with military punctuality. The 2 officers cordially wrung their friend's hand and retired. to the Zulma Cafe for a game at piquet. Captain Servadac at once retraced his steps and left their town. For the last fortnight Servadac had not been occupying his proper lodgings in the military quarters, having been appointed to make a local levy. H had been living in a gorby, or native hut, on the most Aghanam coast, between 4 and 5 miles from the Shelif. High 3 orderly was his sole companion, and by any other man than the captain there, enforced exile would have been esteemed little short of a severe penance. On his way to the gorby, his mental occupation was a very laborious effort to put together what he was pleased to call a rondo, upon a model of versification all but obsolete. This rondo, it is unnecessary to O'Neill, was to be an ode addressed to a young widow by whom he had been captivated, and whom he was anxious to marry, and the tenor of his muse was intended to prove that when once a man has found an object in all respects worthy of his affections he should love her in all simplicity. Whether the aphorism was universally true was not very material to the gallant captain, whose sole ambition at present was to construct a round lay of which this should be the prevailing sentiment. He indulged the fancy that he might succeed in producing a composition which would have a fine effect here in Algeria, where poetry in that form was all but unknown. I know well enough, he said repeatedly to himself, what I want to say. I want to tell her that I love her sincerely, and wish to marry her, but, confound it, the words won't rhyme. Plague on it. Does nothing rhyme with simplicity? Ah, I have it now. Lovers should, they be, love in all simplicity. At what next? How am I to go on? I say, Ben Zoof, he called aloud to his orderly, who was trotting silently close in his rear, did you ever compose any poetry? No, Captain, answered the man promptly, I have never made any verses, but I have seen them made fast enough at a booth during the fete of Montmartre. Can you remember them? Remember them? To be sure I can. This is the way they began. Come in. Come in. You'll not repent the entrance money you have spent. The wondrous mirror in this place reveals your future sweetheart's face. Bosh! Cried Servadac in disgust, your verses are detestable trash. As good as any others, Captain, squeaked through a reed pipe. Hold your tongue, man, said Servadac peremptorily, I have made another couplet. Lovers should, they be, love in all simplicity. Lover, loving honestly, offer I myself to thee. Beyond this, however, the captain's poetical genius was impotent to carry him. His further efforts were unavailing, and when at 6 o'clock he reached the gorby, the 4 lines still remained there. Limit of his composition. Chapter 2. Captain Servadac and his orderly. At the time of which I write, there might be seen in the registers of the Minister of War the following entry. Servadac, Hector, born at Saint Trolody in there. District of Lespa, Department of the Gironde. July 19, 18. Property, 1,200 francs in rent. Off on a comet. Length of service, 14 years, 3 months. And 5 days. Service, 2 years at school at St. Cyr. 2 years at L'école d'Application, 2 years in there. 8th Regiment of the Line, 2 years in the 3rd. Light Cavalry, 7 years in Algeria. Campaigns, Soudan and Japan. Rank, captain on the staff at Mostaganum. Decorations, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor. March 13, 18. Hector Servadac was 30 years of age, an orphan without lineage and almost without means. Thirsting for glory rather than for gold, slightly scatterbrained, but warm-hearted, generous, and brave, he was eminently fitted to be the protégé of the god of battles. For the first year and a half of his existence he had been the foster child of the sturdy wife of a vine-dresser of Medoc, a lineal descendant of their heroes of ancient prowess. In a word, he was one of those individuals whom nature seems to have predestined for remarkable things, and around whose cradle have hovered the fairy godmothers of adventure and good luck. In appearance Hector Servadac was quite the type of an officer. He was rather more than 5 feet 6 inch 3 high, slim and graceful, with dark curling hair and moustaches, well-formed hands and feet, and a clear blue eye. He seemed born to please, without being conscious of the power he possessed. It must be owned, and no one was more ready to confess it than himself, that his literary attainments were by no means of a high order. We don't spin tops is a favorite saying amongst artillery officers, indicating that they do not shirk their duty for frivolous pursuits, but it must be confessed that Servadac, being naturally idle, was very much given to spinning tops. His good abilities, however, and his ready intelligence had carried him success fully through the curriculum of his early career. He was a good draftsman, an excellent rider, having thoroughly mastered the successor to the Mouse Uncle Tom at the riding school of St. Cyr. And in the records of his military service his name had several times been included in the order of their day. The following episode may suffice, in a certain degree, to illustrate his character. Once, in action, he was leading a detachment of infantry through an entrenchment. They came to a place where the sidework of the trench had been so riddled by shell that a portion of it had actually fallen in, leaving an aperture quite unsheltered from the grape shot that was pouring in thick and fast. The men hesitated. In an instant Servadac mounted the side work, laid himself down in the gap, and thus filling up the breach by his own body, shouted, "March on!" And through a storm of shot, not one of which touched the prostrate officer, the troop passed in safety. Since leaving the military college, Servadac, with the exception of his 2 campaigns in the Soudan and Japan, had been always stationed in Algeria. He had now a staff appointment at Mostaganum, and had lately been entrusted with some topographical work on the coast between Tens and the Nine Halif. It was a matter of little consequence to him that the gorge, in which of necessity he was quartered, was uncomfortable and ill-contrived. He loved their open air, and the independence of his life suited him well. Sometimes he would wander on foot upon the sandy shore, and sometimes he would enjoy a ride along the summit of the cliff, altogether being in no hurry at all to bring his task to an end. His occupation, moreover, was not so engrossing but that he could find leisure for taking a short railway journey once or twice a week, so that he was ever and again putting in an appearance at the general's receptions at Oran, and at the fêtes given by the governor at Algiers. It was on one of these occasions that he had first met Madame Duell, the lady to whom he was desirous of dedicating the rondo, the first 4 lines of which had just seen the light. She was a colonel's widow, young and handsome, very reserved, not to say haughty in her manner, and either indifferent or impervious to the admiration which she inspired. Captain Servadac had not yet ventured to declare his attachment. Of rivals he was well aware he had not a few, and amongst these not the least formidable was the Russian Count Timashv. And although the young widow was all unconscious of the share she had in the matter, it was she, and she alone, who was the cause of the challenge just given and accepted by her two ardent admirers. During his residence in the Gorby, Hector Servadac's sole companion was his orderly, Zuf. Ben Zuf was devoted, body and soul, to his superior officer. His own personal ambition was so entirely absorbed in his master's welfare, that it is certain no offer of promotion, even had it been that of aide-de-camp to the Governor-General of Algiers, would have induced him to quit that master's service. His name might seem to imply that he was a native of Algeria, but such was by no means the case. His true name was Laurent. He was a native of Montmartre in Paris, and how or why he had obtained his patronymic was one of those anomalies which the most sagacious of etymologists would find it hard to explain. Born on the hill of Montmartre, between their Solferino Tower and the mill of La Galette, Ben Zuf had ever possessed the most unreserved admiration for his birthplace, and to his eyes there heights and district of Montmartre represented an epitome of all the wonders of the world. In all his travels, and these had been not a few, he had never beheld scenery which could compete with that of his native home. No cathedral, not even Burgos itself, could vie with the church at Montmartre. Its racecourse could well hold its own against that at Pentlick. Its reservoir would throw the Mediterranean into the shade. Its forests had flourished long before the invasion of the Celts, and its very mill produced no ordinary flour, but provided material for cakes of worldwide renown. To crown all, Montmartre boasted a mountain, a veritable mountain. Envious tongues indeed might pronounce it little more than a hill, but Ben Zuf would have allowed himself to be hewn in pieces rather than admit that it was anything less than 15,000 feet in height. Ben Zuf's most ambitious desire was to induce the captain to go with him and end his days in his much loved home, and so incessantly were amazing stories Dax's besieged with descriptions of the unparalleled beauties and advantages of this 18th arrondissement of Paris, that he could scarcely hear the name of Montmartre without a conscious thrill of aversion. Ben Zuf, however, did not despair of ultimately converting the captain, and meanwhile had resolved never to leave him. When a private in the 8th Cavalry, he had been on their point of quitting the army at 28 years of age, but unexpectedly he had been appointed orderly to Captain Servadac. Side by side they fought in 2 campaigns. Servadac had saved Ben Zuf's life in Japan. Ben Zuf had rendered his master a like service in the Soudan. The bond of union thus effected could never be severed, and although Ben Zuf's achievements had fairly earned him the right of retirement, I firmly declined all honors or any pension that might part him from his superior ear. 2 stout arms, an iron constitution, a powerful frame, and an indomitable courage were all loyally devoted to his master's service, and fairly entitled him to his soi-disant designation, or the rampart of Montmartre. Unlike his master, he made no pretension to any gift of poetic power. But his inexhaustible memory made him a living encyclopedia, and for his stock of anecdotes and troopers' tales he was matchless, thoroughly appreciating his servant's good qualities. Captain Servadac endured with imperturbable good humor those idiosyncrasies, which in Lee's faithful follower would have been intolerable, and from time to time he would drop a word of sympathy that served to deepen his subordinate's devotion. On one occasion, when Ben Zoof had mounted high 3 hobby horse, and was indulging in high-flown praises about his beloved 18th arrondissement, the captain had remarked gravely, "Do you know, Ben Zoof, that Montmartre only requires a matter of some 13,000 feet to make it as high as Montana Blanc?" Ben Zoof's eyes glistened with delight, and from that moment Hector Servadac and Montmartre held equal places in his affection. Interrupted effusions, composed of mud and loose stones, and covered with a thatch of turf and straw, known to the natives by the name of Driss, the Gorby, though a grade better than the tents of the nomad Arabs, was yet far inferior to any habitation built of brick or stone. It adjoined an old stone hostelry, previously occupied by a detachment of engineers, and which now afforded shelter for Ben Zoof and the 2 horses. It still contained a considerable number of tools, such as mattocks, shovels, and pickaxes. Uncomfortable as was their temporary abode, Servadac and his attendant made no complaints. Neither of them was dainty in the matter either of board or lodging. After dinner, leaving his orderly to stow away the remains of the repast in what he were pleased to term the cupboard of his stomach, Captain Servadac turned out into the open air to smoke his pipe upon the edge of the cliff. There, shades of night were drawing on. An hour previously, veiled in heavy clouds, the sun had sunk below the horizon that bounded the plain beyond the Shalif. The sky presented a most singular appearance towards the north, although the darkness rendered it impossible to see beyond a quarter of a mile. There, upper strata of the atmosphere were suffused with a rosy glare. No well-defined fringe of light, nor arch of luminous rays, betokened a display of aurora borealis, even had such a phenomenon been possible in these latitudes, and the most experienced meteorologist would have been puzzled to explain the cause of this striking illumination on this 31st of December, the last evening of the passing year. But Captain Servadac was no meteorologist, and it is to be doubted whether, since leaving school, he had ever opened his course of cosmography. Besides, he had other thoughts to occupy his mind. The prospects of the morrow offered serious matter for consideration. The captain was actuated by no personal animosity against the Count, though rivals, the 2 men regarded each other with sincere respect. They had simply reached a crisis in which one of them was the trap, which of them, fate must decide. At 8 o'clock, Captain Servadac re-entered their Gorby, the single apartment of which contained here bed, a small writing table, and some trunks that served instead of cupboards. The orderly performed his culinary operations in the adjoining building, which he also used as a bedroom, and where, extended on what he called his good oak mattress, he would sleep soundly as a dormouse for 12 hours at a stretch. Ben Zoof had not yet received his orders to retire, and ensconcing himself in a corner of the Gorby, he endeavored to doze, a task which the unusual agitation of his master rendered somewhat difficult. Captain Servadac was evidently in no hurry to betake himself to read, but seating himself at his table, with a pair of compasses and a sheet of drawing paper, he began to draw, with red and blue crayons, a variety of colored lines, which could hardly be supposed to have much connection with a topographical survey. In truth, his actor of staff officer were now entirely absorbed in that of Gascon poet, whether he imagined that their compasses would bestow upon his verses the measure of a mathematical accuracy, or whether he fancied that the party-colored lines would lend variety to his rhythm. It 13 impossible to determine, be that as it may, he was devoting all his energies to their compilation of his rondo, and supremely difficult he found the task. Hang it, he ejaculated, whatever induced me to choose this meter? It is as hard to find rhymes as to rally fugitives in a bat. But, by all the powers, it shan't be said that a French officer cannot cope with a piece of poetry. One battalion has fought, now for the rest. Perseverance had its reward. Presently 2 lines, one red, the other blue, appeared upon their paper, and the captain murmured, "Words, mere words, cannot avail. Telling true heart apostrophe 3 tender tale." "What on earth ails my master?" muttered Ben Zoof. For the last hour he has been as fidgety as a bird returning after its winter migration. Servadac suddenly started from his seat, and as off on a comet, he paced the room with all the frenzy of poetic inspiration. "Read out. Empty words cannot convey all a lover's heart would say." "Well, to be sure, he is at his everlasting verses again," said Ben Zoof to himself, as he roused himself in his corner. "Impossible to sleep in such a noise," and he gave vent to a loud groan. "How now, Ben Zoof?" said the captain sharply. "What ails you?" "Nothing, sir, only the nightmare." "Curse the fellow, he has quite interrupted me," ejaculated the captain. "Ben Zoof," he called aloud. "Here, sir," was the prompt reply, and in an instant the orderly was upon his feet, standing in a military attitude, one hand to his forehead, the other closely pressed to his trousers era. "Stay where you are. Don't move an inch," shouted Servadac. "I have just thought of the end of my rondo." And in a voice of inspiration, accompanying his words with dramatic gestures, Servadac began to declaim. "Listen, lady, to my vows. 0, consent to be my spouse. Constant ever I will be. Constant." No closing lines were uttered. All at once, with unutterable violence, the captain and his orderly were dashed, face downwards, to the ground. To be continued. That was our show, and thank you all. Vid me thanks to Frater SH and Sir Peter Pendragon.